Welcome to Feminine Founder, where we talk all things recruiting, hiring, business, and entrepreneurship. Today, I have Marsha Jean-Louis with me. She's the president of TG Brands and a board member of the Young Presidents Organization. So welcome, Marsha.
Thanks, Caroline.
So I'd love to hear your story behind how you became the president of TG Brands.
Sure. So I would describe that journey as very unexpected. It was not something I was planning, and being in the hair and beauty space was also not something I was planning on being in. And so, very quick background: born and raised in Boston, lived in New York for a couple of years. I went to grad school at Columbia, SIPA, so I was studying finance and international development, finance and economic policy. And I remember, my first year there, I was at the UN, and, I thought post graduation, I was either going to stay at the UN or work at the World Bank or something like that. I was interested in impact investing as well. So a lot of my colleagues, they ended up going, to Wall Street, but working in the impact investing arms of, major banks. And but right before I went to grad school, I started a passion project. It was a hair product that was geared for women who was, struggling with alopecia, hair thinning, things like that. And I continued that business while I was a student. So I had inventory stuffed in my locker, inventory stuck underneath my bed, and I would mail it through in the middle of classes or between classes. And I started that in 2015. So I would say I left Boston to New York in August, and I launched the business like July of 2015. Fast forward, I graduated, and I found myself realizing I actually don't want to be in this space for many reasons, maybe outside of the scope of this interview. And I would say that described most of my career, because after graduate school, when undergrad, I studied political science, pre-law. And it wasn't until my senior year that I decided I actually have no business or interest being a lawyer. In fact, I remember there was a faculty member, her husband was a really famous judge. This is back in Boston. And she asked me, Marsha, why do you want to become a lawyer? I did not have an answer for her. If anything, I stared at her and said, well, I actually want to travel. And so I would say in general, I find that I found my yeses by, finding out what my no's are. So now fast forward, graduate school, similar thing. Oh, I actually don't want to be in this space, right? So my parents at this point are looking at me like, what are you doing with your life? And so I would say it was really serendipitous. So I met someone who was basically in the process of acquiring different businesses in the hair and beauty space, and he was interested in mine. And so it led to an acquisition, and then that led to an acqui-hire. So I was asked to leave New York, traveled to Atlanta, where I now serve as president of this holding company.
So in your experience, what are the top 3 things that have fueled growth for your company?
Sure. I would say several things. One is, even though the brands that we own are, 10, 12 years old, so they're not startups by any means, but the holding company and the team that we formed around these brands are relatively new. So we saw ourselves as a startup. So several things. One, we didn't have to deal with a lot of, the politics, and there wasn't a lot of hierarchy in the organization. It was a pretty flat organization. And the benefits of that is that allows us to test a lot of things. So we were throwing everything on the wall and seeing what sticks. We were launching new programs, launching new products, and doing it quickly, affordably, and just seeing if it works. And so that ability to, test a bunch of things allowed us to find things that did work, the right products that would sell, and, the right, programs. We started something called the Wholesale Buyers Club, which connected hairstylists to some of our brands, and, that grew quickly. So I would say that's one is, the space for us to test things. The second thing is because we saw ourselves as a startup. I think we came in with fresh ideas. And so I did not study anything in the beauty space. I did not study marketing. As a woman, I wore hair extensions or, I understood that space, but I was coming into the business using a different lens. And so I just finished reading a book called Range, and it talked about the importance of breadth and that, not being an expert is what I think, what's the saying? If you're not, I forgot the saying, I don't want to mess it up, but basically there is power in understanding, multiple things. And so I think because of that, I was able to go in there and I understand economics, right? So I studied economic policy, albeit in a different space, but, certain things still were relevant. When, think about last year where we were seeing this economic volatility, I paid close attention to what was happening in the macro economy. And I was using my understanding of that to prepare our business for pain, right? So, before everyone was starting to, cut costs, we were doing that way earlier just because I knew something was happening because of my economic background. So I would say that we have a team of people who are not necessarily experts in the hair and beauty space, but experts in different spaces. And together that breadth has allowed us to really, grow our business. And third, I would say, just, I guess, a deep understanding, a deep connection to our customer. When I first joined, that was something that was critical for me to do. As someone who did not have, a background in, hair and beauty or running a CPG company. Well, not in this way anyways. Outside of my small business that I had, it's not like I understood this specific customer that was a little bit different than my customer. So really learning who your customer is. And I'm talking about going to our retail stores, talking to them, constantly sending out surveys to kind of get feedback, talking to the hairstylists who oftentimes promote our product, really diving deep into learning your customer, which is something I would say I'm starting to see a lot of businesses and startups, because I advise for different businesses and startups. They seem to not do that. Like it's a lot of raising money and spending on Google and Facebook and not about, really learning who your customer is, what their needs are. And so I would say between those three things is what helped grow our business these last, 5-6 years.
I think that's huge, the diving deep into the customer piece, because you're right. Anyone can go run a Facebook ad or Instagram ad and see what's going to stick. But unless you really understand the pain points and the copy and what's going to sell and what's going to help them solve a problem,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be an everlasting brand.
Right.
So you've become an executive leader. I mean, you've owned your own company, you've sold your company, you went into a holding company as an executive leader in a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say has contributed to all of your success?
Yeah, I would say it's mainly two things. And this is cliche and I hate to say it, but it's true, is just hard work. So I think about my first 3 years at the company. I just, it was normal for me to work 12, 13-hour days. Right. And I'm not necessarily encouraging people to do that, but I will tell you that's what I did. And not only that, I spent time working in different areas of the business. So when I first came in, I was not president, I was head of product development. And then I became a marketing director, and then brand manager, and then president. And what that has allowed me to do, and because our business is also small, so our structure allowed me to do this quite easily, was I had my foot in every area of that business. So if it was our retail expansion, so at its peak, we had 6 retail stores. I helped open up, how many of those? 3 of those. I understand supply chain. I understand product development. I understand customer service. There will be times I am on intercom and I was answering customer inquiries. I understand marketing. And because of that, I had a holistic understanding of how the business ran. And I was able to quickly kind of be that main person, the main go-to of understanding, there's a problem, Mark, I had the tools to be able to fix it. And also, not only that, I would say my strong suit is augmentation. I'm really good at seeing how the current process is and figuring out how to optimize and how to augment. And I think that those skills has helped me just the breadth and also, my natural inclination to understand how to optimize things, I think has led me to kind of become an executive pretty quickly.
I just read a book by Marie Folio called Everything is Figure Outable. And
Mhm.
a lot of what she talks about in that book is exactly what you're describing as you have to just self-teach yourself and
Yeah.
figure it out and learn from your mistakes and make pivots. And you don't have to be an expert to do it, but you need to just try it.
Right. Right.
So, as an entrepreneur, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about going out on their own?
Hmm. Several things. So I have advised many people, many startups, and I there's several things. Number one, if they want to go out on their own, they need to make sure that they can. What I've seen all too often are people who are just they have this enthusiasm. I want to start my own business, and they jump. They'll leave their stable 9 to 5 to go full like 2 feet in into this new venture without really understanding what that's going to take. And they oftentimes find themselves overly stressed, right? Now it's, how do I pay my bills? Where, right? Because your business most likely is not going to be able to, in the first year or two, or, some do, but for the most part, that's not the case. So I would say, first off, make sure you are in a position which, you could dedicate, your full time into that business. And that will likely mean for the first couple of years, working more. That means, working your 9 to 5, but then at night, focusing on growing your business. And it's not until your business has grown enough where you should kind of make that jump. So I always, believe that there's some people who have, a safety net where, they could, just leave and, the bills are paid for, all that. I'm not necessarily talking to those people, but for, the overwhelming majority of those people who don't have safety nets, to just make sure that they're really realistic in terms of, how they want to approach this. Second thing I would say is, so one, we talked about, I just want to, I'm trying to go back to kind of what I've spoken to other founders and members. So one, just making sure that there's stability. Two is focusing on really getting to making sure that they are solving a real problem. That's actually the second thing that, I oftentimes find. I don't know what has happened. I always like to blame the startup world. I've started startups, so, nothing to them, but I find that the startup culture has taught people to take unnecessary risk and spend unnecessary money and do all these things that are unnecessary. I like to talk to people and say, think that you are starting a small business. That approach is a little bit different because you're doing things more carefully. You're being more conservative how you spend your money. And you're building your brand from the ground up. And I think, again, kind of similar to how I approached when I first joined 2G Brands, really getting to know your customer and really understanding what is a problem I am trying to solve. I think all too often, a lot of people are drawn into the allure of starting their own business or being an entrepreneur without realizing, is the product and service that I'm offering, is that something that people actually want? So I think doing a little bit more customer discovery and really, talking to people is something I would encourage people to do before, jumping and, being full, whatever their startup is or their small business is, to really understand what it is that they're trying to solve.
That's great advice. And most people don't have that safety net at all. I would say 99% of people don't have a safety net
Mhm.
in place. And so making sure you can build something on top of your full time job. And so it gets to a place, and you're right, it's going to take a couple of years before you can get to an income producing place. That's because even if you're making money from your product, you're putting it right back into your company. You're not just going and paying yourself.
Right, right.
So, what's been the most rewarding thing for you as an entrepreneur?
I would say there's been a lot, I would say. But if I could summarize, these last 5, 6 years, it would be the people I work with. So I've had the ability to, hire great people. And that to me has made this journey most rewarding, is hiring people who have the same vision and are just as excited as you are to kind of, run toward that vision, and they're in there in the trenches with you. I would say I experienced most of my growth managing other people, because I find oftentimes they're teaching me about myself. How do I manage? What do I prioritize? Especially these last couple of years, since COVID, really, a lot of things kind of came to the surface of how do we prioritize not only the business but our lives holistically as individuals. I've put into place better work-life balance because of just how the world has been and how people have spoken to me like, hey Marsha, you work a lot. Let's maybe not work on a Saturday night, right? So I've had people kind of speak to me about these things, and I think that has been rewarding, is the type of growth I've experienced with other members of my team.
Would you say that you're a different manager now than you were 5 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I've become more human. I think before, especially because I'm coming in, I saw myself as an underdog. I was 26 when I came into the company. Yeah, so I was young. I didn't have as much experience because I spent most of my time in school, and so I was really kind of I was very almost not the best person to work with. I would say that because I felt as if I had to put on a mask that I am, a leader. When, throughout time, I realized, no, I can actually be myself, be human, be, likable, and really work with people in a more human way than just being the manager or being the boss. So I definitely say I'm a completely different person now than I was in the beginning. I basically I've been able to take the mask off, and that to me has been really important. So
That's huge. And
yeah,
that I'm sure will go a long way, or that has gone a long way with your current and even past employees.
right, right.
So, as we wrap up, how can our listeners find you?
Sure. I am one of the few millennials who are not too active on social media. So the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. You can find me linkedin.com/ I think it's Marsha J. Lewis. So
Great. Well, thanks for your time.
yeah, thank you.